The small diner on the corner of town was nothing fancy, just a simple place with worn-out booths, the smell of fresh coffee, and the sound of plates clinking behind the counter. It was the kind of place where regulars came every morning, where truck drivers stopped for a quick meal, and where life moved at a steady, predictable pace. Among the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, a young waitress moved swiftly between tables. Her name was Emily. She had been working here for years, balancing plates on her arms, refilling coffee cups, and greeting every customer with a warm smile. She wasn't just polite, she truly cared. No matter how tired she was, no matter how long her shift had been, she always made sure every customer felt welcome. But behind that smile was exhaustion. Bills were piling up at home. Rent was due. Groceries weren't getting any cheaper. She had been doing everything she could to keep going, but some days it felt impossible. That night, as she wiped down a table near the window, a man walked in. He didn't stand out much, plain clothes, a calm expression, but there was something different about him. He took a seat at the counter, ordered a simple meal, and watched the world around him. Emily didn't know it yet, but this man, this quiet customer, was about to change her life in a way she never could have imagined. The alarm rang before the sun even rose. Emily groaned, rubbing her tired eyes as she sat up in bed. She had barely slept. Another night spent worrying about bills, calculating how much she could stretch her next paycheck. Rent was due next week. The electric bill wasn't far behind. And groceries, well, she'd figure that out later. She shuffled into the small kitchen of her one-bedroom apartment. The fridge was nearly empty. A half carton of milk, a few eggs, and some leftovers from the diner. She poured herself a cup of cheap coffee, hoping it would be enough to push her through another long shift. By the time she got to work, the diner was already coming to life. The same regulars sat in their usual spots, their conversations blending into the hum of the morning rush. Emily tied her apron, took a deep breath, and got to work. The hours dragged on. Some customers were kind, leaving small tips and kind words. Others barely acknowledged her, treating her like she was invisible. Then there were the rude ones, the ones who snapped their fingers, complained about everything, and left nothing behind but a mess. Still, Emily smiled through it all. She had no choice. She wasn't just working for herself. She had a younger brother in college who she helped with tuition whenever she could. Her mother, too sick to work, relied on her for support. Every dollar she earned was already spent before she even got it. As the day wore on, exhaustion crept in. Her feet ached, her arms were sore, but she kept moving. She had to. Then, in the middle of the evening shift, the door opened. A man walked in, quiet, unassuming. Emily barely noticed him at first. Just another customer, another order to take. She greeted him with a tired but genuine smile and handed him a menu. She had no idea that this moment, this ordinary interaction, was about to change everything. The man sat at the counter, his eyes scanning the room. It wasn't his first time in a place like this. He preferred small diners over fancy restaurants. They felt real. No pretense, no luxury, just regular people living their lives. He had built his fortune from nothing. Growing up, his family had struggled, just like the people around him now. He knew what it felt like to worry about money, to count every dollar, to wonder if things would ever get better. That's why he liked coming to places like this. It reminded him of where he came from. His eyes landed on the waitress moving from table to table. She was fast, efficient, always smiling. But he could see the exhaustion behind it. The kind of tiredness that doesn't come from just one long shift, but from months, maybe years, of working too hard for too little. She wasn't like the other workers he had seen in high-end places, who moved through their shifts with practiced politeness. She was different. She actually cared. He could see it in the way she spoke to customers, the way she handled difficult ones without losing her patience, the way she checked on an older man's meal, making sure everything was just right. She wasn't just doing her job, she was giving it her all. And he respected that. He had met many wealthy people in his life, but wealth didn't impress him. Hard work did. As she approached to take his order, he made a decision. Tonight, he wasn't just going to pay for his meal. Tonight, he was going to change someone's life. Emily approached the counter, her notepad in hand. She gave the man a polite smile, the same one she gave every customer, despite how tired she felt. "Good evening. What can I get for you?" she asked. The man looked up from the menu, his expression calm. "Just a simple meal, whatever you'd recommend," she nodded. "The house special is pretty good." "Then I'll take that," he said, handing her the menu. As she wrote down the order, he watched her closely, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a quiet curiosity. "Busy night?" he asked. She let out a small laugh. "Aren't they all?" He chuckled. "I guess so. Do you ever get a break?" Emily shrugged. "Not really, but it's part of the job." The conversation was brief, but something about it felt different. Most customers didn't ask about her, and if they did, they rarely cared about the answer. But this man, he was actually listening. She brought his meal when it was ready, setting the plate in front of him. "Here you go. Let me know if you need anything else." He nodded. "Thank you, Emily." She paused. She hadn't told him her name. Then she realized he had read it off her name tag. Most people didn't even bother. As he ate, she moved around the diner, tending to other tables, refilling drinks, handling complaints. At one point, a man at another table snapped at her over cold coffee. She apologized, refilled his cup, and smiled through it, even though she wanted to walk away. The billionaire saw it all. The way she kept her patience, the way she never let frustration show. He had made the right choice. When he finished his meal, he signaled for the check. Emily brought it over, not expecting anything special. Just another customer, another bill to settle. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Emily placed the bill on the counter with a polite smile. "Take your time," she said before moving on to clean a nearby table. The man nodded, reaching into his pocket, but instead of pulling out cash or a credit card, he took out a checkbook. He paused for a moment, thinking. Then, with steady hands, he wrote down the amount, $100,000. No hesitation, no second thoughts. At the bottom of the check, he scribbled a small note. "For your hard work, keep going." He slid the check under the receipt, placed a few bills on top of it, and quietly got up from his seat. No grand gestures, no announcement, just a simple act of kindness. Emily, still focused on cleaning, barely noticed him leave. A few minutes later, she walked back to the counter, picking up the bill without looking. She was used to small tips. Sometimes a couple of dollars, sometimes nothing at all. It was just part of the job. She lifted the receipt, expecting to pocket the usual change. But instead, her eyes landed on the check. At first, she thought she was seeing things. $100,000? That couldn't be right. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was fake. Her hand started shaking as she picked it up, reading the note at the bottom. "For your hard work, keep going." Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded. This couldn't be real. Could it? Her eyes darted to the door. She scanned the diner, searching for the man, but he was already gone. Her knees felt weak. She gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. One of her coworkers noticed her frozen in place. "Emily, you okay?" She turned to them, her voice barely above a whisper. I think this man just tipped me $100,000. Silence. Then, laughter. "Yeah, right," her coworker joked. "Let me see." Emily held out the check, her fingers trembling. The moment her coworker's eyes landed on it, their smile vanished. Oh my God. The entire diner seemed to go quiet. Emily's world had just changed in an instant, and she still couldn't believe it. Emily stared at the check, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. $100,000. That was more money than she had ever seen in her life. More than a year's salary. More than enough to pay off her debts. Her hands trembled as she traced over the numbers with her fingers, as if touching it would make it feel more real. Her coworker was still frozen beside her. "Emily, this can't be real, right?" "I don't know," she whispered. Her heart pounded in her chest. She turned the check over, checking for something, anything, that would tell her this was some kind of prank. But the signature at the bottom was real. The ink was fresh. Her first instinct was to run outside, to find the man who had left it. She rushed to the diner's entrance, her eyes scanning the sidewalk. Nothing. The street was busy, but he was gone. Vanished like a ghost. She stepped back inside, gripping the check so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Why would someone do this?" she murmured. Her manager, who had overheard everything, approached cautiously. "Emily, sit down, before you pass out." She sank into a chair at the counter, still staring at the check. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from shock, but from something deeper: relief. For years she had worked herself to exhaustion, barely making ends meet. She had pushed through long hours, rude customers, endless stress, and now, in an instant, everything had changed. A single act of kindness had rewritten her future. She wiped her eyes, still overwhelmed. "What are you gonna do?" her coworker asked. Emily took a deep breath, the weight of the moment finally sinking in. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But I think my life just changed." She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know why he had chosen her. But one thing was certain: she would never forget this moment for as long as she lived. Emily sat at the counter, staring at the check in her hands. The reality of the moment was starting to settle in, but it still didn't feel real. Her coworkers crowded around, their eyes wide with shock. "This actually happened," one of them whispered. The diner, once filled with the usual hum of conversation, had gone quiet. Customers who had overheard the commotion were now watching, curious. Then, someone spoke up. "You have to cash it, Emily." She let out a nervous laugh, wiping her eyes. "I don't even know if I can." She had never handled this much money before. Was it really that simple? Could she just walk into a bank and deposit $100,000 like it was nothing? Before she could think too much about it, she reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number she knew by heart. "Hello?" It was her mother. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her throat tightened. "Emily?" her mother said again, concern creeping into her voice. A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. "Mom, I think something unbelievable just happened." She could hear the worry in her mother's voice turn into confusion. "What do you mean?" Emily swallowed hard, staring down at the check again. "I just got a tip, a big one, a life-changing one." Her mother was silent for a moment. Then, softly, she asked, "How much?" Emily took a shaky breath. $100,000. The words felt unreal even as she said them. The silence on the other end lasted longer this time. Then, she heard a quiet gasp. "Emily, is this real?" "I think it is," she whispered. Her coworkers were still buzzing around her, but in that moment, everything else faded away. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know why that man had chosen her. But for the first time in a long time, Emily felt something she hadn't in years: hope. And for now, that was enough.